To complete the most relevant aspects regarding the development of the Angular application for desktop size, we would still have to see how to implement the input fields, which in our case will be given only in the contact screen. There we can see that there's first a combo box for the user to select from a number of options the subject of their query. The description that we see outside the combo box will be the label of the variable. Also, that inside the combo box, there is a suggestion message. When the user clicks there or on the little arrow, the options will expand for the user to select one. Then there are 4 edit fields, where the user can enter personal data. These fields don't have a descriptive label, because the invitation message that appears when no value has been entered in them makes it clear what the field is about. When the user starts typing into these fields, the invitation message will disappear. It'll reappear only if the user empties the field. If we remember the preparation stage, we had entered 2 typography classes for these texts. One we had called form text for the label texts, and another we had called form text placeholder for the internal texts, precisely these invitation texts. Note that I created a contact DSO to style the panel of the same name and added it to the root DSO, travel agency. I'm going to copy these classes for our DSO. If I'm only going to have input fields in this panel, then I might as well just leave them here and delete them from the base DSO. If we continue analyzing the page, I have another edit field with a label on top, and at the bottom, I have a field of checkbox type with the label on the left side. It's important that we implement all these controls as variables with their labels, and not as 2 separate controls. A text block control for the label and a variable control for the field itself. Why? Because first, conceptually, it's the most appropriate option, and second, and as a consequence, because it'll have an effect on accessibility. If it's the same field, all the semantics are already understood. If they're 2 separate fields, they'll have to be related, and even then the same thing will not be achieved. So what I want to show you in this video is how we model the user interface of the control given that it'll be unique. We have to model 2 things, the field itself and the label. But if the field is only one, then how do we do it? I'll show it in detail for the first case, and the rest you'll be able to figure out by yourselves. Anyway, I'll leave an XPZ file with part of the solution for you to complete it. But first, let's see that clearly all the fields will go in a table so that they're aligned. Here I already created the variables that will be the input ones and inserted them in the tables we see. None of this requires new knowledge. It's what we've been doing, so let's not waste time looking at it again. Now we're going to focus on the first variable. Once I inserted it, note that I placed as label caption the text that I took from the property in Figma. By default, the variables in the panels are input variables, and for that reason, the read-only property is set to false. Note that I changed the default value to the label position property so that it places the label above the field and not to the left as the default value. In addition, I configured the invite message property so that this is the text that appears inside the field when it's empty. Lastly, note that the way to make the variable not edit type, which is the default value, is the type of these below, for example. Anyways, as I was saying, instead of a combo box, is through the control type property. When this value, combo box, is chosen, the values property appears in order to provide the options. That is to say, the names that the user will see on the screen for each option and the value that will be stored internally in the variable when the corresponding option is selected. We could add an item that corresponds to the empty or not selected value. And through this property, we assign a text. which by default is the one that's encoded in this constant, and that is none. We're going to see it now at runtime. We could place here the text we want for the empty value if we don't want to use the one that Genexus shows by default, which, since the variable is a varchar type, will correspond to the empty string value. We could have set the variable as a numeric value, for example, because what will be shown on the screen are the names of the options and not the values. The user will never see the actual value, but I chose it to be a varchar type in case later I want it to be an edit field instead of a combo. Note also that by default, the accessible name custom property took the value of the label caption property. We could run now, as I still haven't assigned classes to the controls, in order to clearly see the difference later. Here we see the label and the invitation message. And we also see the names of the options, and this none that I mentioned. We know that the class for the label typography was the one we had called form text, and the one for the field itself, which will be for the combo options, the one we had called form text placeholder. Then we'll see the one for the invite message. So we'll associate this second class with our control, but this is only the typography class, not the combo control itself. And we still haven't done anything regarding the label. In Figma, we see these radius and border properties. If we ask for the CSS code, we'll have to take these two properties to Genexus. This is the color of our gray 200 token. So I'm going to create a class to model the combo box part itself. I'll call it form combo box, and here I copied the two properties and replace here with the color token. And of course, I assign it to the combo box control. So this control is going to have two classes, the one for the typography and the one that gives style to the combo box itself. We could include both in one, or keep them separate, if, for example, we were to only use the typography in another control. To indicate the color of the invite message, we have a Genexus property. We're going to look for it by filtering by the properties for controls of attribute type. That's the same type as that of the variables. Let's filter instead by gx_in. And there we see it. If we choose from here a color, it already adds it. Let's set the color token that we use for the typography class of the control. Now, let's assign the class for the label. It'll be gx_label_class. What I'll do is assign a new class to it, which I'll call form_label. For now, I will only define it including the typography class, but we'll see that we have to add more properties to it. Let's run it to see what we've done so far. It starts to take shape, but let's look at the combo text. It's stuck to the left edge, and the height of the field also looks bigger than Figma's. If we inspect it, it has a height of 84 pixels, but if we go to Figma, the height should be 60. In addition, the text should be 29, with a top padding of 16 and a bottom padding of 15, on the left of 38, and on the right of 25. Then we should add these properties to the class. Padding block, that is, padding in the vertical direction of 16 pixels. The padding below is 15, but let's leave the two of them with the same value, 16. And padding inline, in other words, in the horizontal direction, of 38 pixels at the beginning and 24 at the end. Also, let's specify the height of 60 pixels. Okay, what about the label? If I inspect it, I see that it's 40 high, which we'll see is the line height value of the typography, without margins or paddings. Let's see what happens if, for example, I give this element, just for a quick test, a margin block end of 49. There we see the 49 of the margin and the 40 of the height. And if we add an inline start margin of 16, it matches exactly what we see in Figma. Then, to the label class, we add the two properties. I wasn't very precise before. Actually, in Chechu's design, we don't see anywhere the typography corresponding to the values that the user will enter in the fields. Our form, text placeholder class, actually corresponds to the invitation messages. In general, the invitation message has the same typography as the content of the field except for the color. In addition, the invitation message is much lighter, usually a light gray, and that's why there's a property to indicate the color. So this value is correct, but what we don't know then is the color that the content of the field should have. It would be necessary to discuss this with the designer. Possibly this would lead us to define another color token for the content. Let's set, for example, this value. And here we would reference that token. To better organize all this, I would associate the combo box with a single class that contains everything, and not two. And then, in this class, I include the typography. At this point, we realize that the initial analysis we did of the typography classes we would need for the input fields was not thorough. And in truth, this class should rather be called form text content. Since this is the first time we use it, it's time to rename it. If we don't delete it from the base DSO, then watch out, because it's repeated. I copied it to this one, because remember that if I want to use the include rule, for now the class to be included must be in the same DSO. With our previous solution, with the two separate classes for control, it was not necessary to have it here. If we execute now, we have a problem, as we're not seeing the invite message with the color gray 200, the light gray, but with the same as the typography class. This is because for now, only the property GX invite message color is valid for the edit fields. That is to say, it'll work for all these other fields, to which we haven't customized the style yet. All the default values are used, but it's what we have left to do. To implement the separation line that we see in Figma of 2 pixels and this color, I place this table of 2 dips high, to which I'm going to assign this content separator class, where to the background color, I'll give this value. Now we should continue doing what we did for this combo box field for the others. I'll leave them as a task for you. Note that these are edit type fields without label and with invite message. For the edit type controls, you can define a series of things. For example, making suggestions as the user's typing. You may search in the Genexus wiki and explore all the options. This other variable is also edit, but it has a label at the top, and it doesn't have invite message. And finally, this other one is of checkbox type, with the label to the left. Note that among the control types for the variables, we have many other options that have to do with the user interface, and that I also invite you to explore. This is the end of the most relevant aspects that I wanted to share with you about the development of the Angular application for desktop size. From the beginning, we said that for desktop size, we'll only have to implement this application, the Angular one. Later, when we get into the other screen sizes, both tablet and phone, the world is already divided into 2 paradigms: Angular, web, and native. That is, we'll have to implement there the two variants, and in the native world, the Android variant and the Apple variant. We're going to talk about this in the next module, as an introduction and general analysis of how we would have to design the screens and the application. In short, in order to be as efficient as possible and reuse as much as possible. Now, not only between screens of the same platform, but also to be able to share the same development and design for all platforms, which is quite a challenge. But we'll talk about all that in the following section. I look forward to seeing you.